Have you ever noticed how natural it feels to believe that your choices are your own? The videos you watch, the music you like, the opinions you agree with, the things you want. It all feels personal, intimate, even uniquely yours. And this belief is comforting, because the idea that you are choosing freely is deeply tied to your sense of identity, to the feeling that your life belongs to you. But what if that feeling is carefully engineered? What if the sense of choice itself is part of the illusion? You live in a world that constantly presents itself as infinite content, infinite opinions, infinite possibilities. And yet the strange paradox is that the more options you are given, the narrower your path becomes. You scroll, you click, you consume, and everything feels tailored, familiar, aligned with you. But alignment is not the same as freedom. Sometimes it is the opposite. Algorithms do not need to control you directly. They do not tell you what to think or who to be. They simply learn what keeps you engaged, what makes you pause, what makes you react. And slowly, almost invisibly, they begin to shape the environment you live inside. Not the physical one, but the psychological one. The world of ideas, images, narratives, and identities that surrounds you every day. You are shown what confirms you, not what challenges you. What excites you, not what deepens you. What keeps you scrolling, not what makes you stop and reflect. And because this happens gradually, you rarely notice the narrowing. You feel understood, seen, represented. But being mirrored is not the same as being known. And being reflected back to yourself endlessly does not expand you. It traps you. The illusion of choice works precisely because it feels personal. You think you discovered something. You think you decided. You think you arrived at your beliefs through reflection. But much of what you encounter is pre-filtered, pre-selected, optimized not for truth, but for engagement. And engagement thrives on predictability, on emotional reaction, on keeping you inside patterns that are easy to model and monetize. Carl Jung warned that the greatest danger to individuality is unconscious identification. When you are unaware of the forces shaping you, you mistake adaptation for authenticity. You believe you are expressing yourself, when in reality you are being gently steered, not toward what is true, but toward what is profitable, toward what keeps you predictable. Over time, this predictability becomes internalized. You begin to desire what you are shown. You begin to think in the language you are fed. You adopt identities that are already packaged, already labeled, already sorted into categories. And because these identities come with communities, validation, and a sense of belonging, they feel real, they feel earned, they feel chosen. But ask yourself something uncomfortable. How often do you encounter ideas that genuinely disturb you, that force you to rethink yourself, that don't immediately fit into your existing worldview? And how quickly do you scroll past them when you do? The algorithm learns from this too. It learns what you avoid, and it protects you from it. Choice in this environment becomes constrained without ever feeling forced. You are free to choose as long as you choose within the frame provided. You can express yourself as long as your expression remains legible to the system. And the more you stay within these invisible boundaries, the more the system rewards you with relevance, visibility, and confirmation. This is the first layer of the illusion. Not that algorithms decide for you, but that they decide the space in which your decisions occur. And most people never question the space itself. Because once the space of your choices has been quietly defined, the next step happens almost automatically. The system begins to recognize you, or at least a version of you. A profile built not from who you believe yourself to be, but from what you do repeatedly, impulsively, unconsciously. Every pause, every like, every second of attention becomes a data point. Not to understand you as a person, but to predict you as a pattern. This is where identity starts to shift, not through persuasion, but through reinforcement. You are shown more of what you already respond to, more of what confirms your emotional tendencies, more of what keeps you inside a familiar psychological climate. And slowly, your inner world adapts to the environment around it. You begin to feel that certain interests define you, certain opinions represent you, certain reactions are who you are. But what feels like self-discovery is often self-narrowing. Algorithms do not ask who you could become. They only measure who you already appear to be, and then they amplify it. If you show curiosity, you are fed stimulation. If you show anger, you are fed outrage. If you show fear, you are fed reassurance or threat, depending on what keeps you engaged longer. And because engagement is rewarded, the system gently encourages emotional extremes, not balance, not reflection, intensity. Over time, this intensity becomes familiar. You begin to seek it. Calm feels boring. Nuance feels slow. Anything that does not provoke an immediate reaction feels irrelevant. And this shift does not feel imposed. It feels like preference, like taste, like personality. But preferences shaped by constant reinforcement are not neutral. They are conditioned. Carl Jung spoke about the danger of identifying too closely with collective images. When the individual mistakes external symbols for inner truth, the self becomes hollow. In the digital world, these symbols are everywhere. Ideologies packaged as identities, aesthetics packaged as meaning, opinions packaged as character. You are invited not to think, but to adopt, not to question, but to align. And alignment feels good. It offers certainty. It offers belonging. It offers relief from ambiguity. You no longer have to struggle with who you are. The system tells you, labels you, categorizes you. And as long as you remain consistent, you are rewarded with visibility and affirmation. But consistency is not depth, it is repetition. This is how the illusion tightens. You believe you are choosing who you are, but in reality, you are selecting from a menu of pre-validated identities. You feel autonomous, yet your range of expression becomes increasingly predictable. You speak in phrases you have absorbed. You react in ways that are expected. You defend positions that feel personal, even when you cannot remember how you arrived at them. The most unsettling part is how natural this feels. You rarely experience it as manipulation. You experience it as clarity, as self-knowledge, as finally finding your people. But finding your people is not the same as finding yourself. And when identity is shaped primarily through external feedback, inner authority weakens. You may notice this as a growing discomfort with silence, with not knowing, with holding a thought that does not immediately resolve into a stance. The algorithm has trained you to react quickly, to position yourself, to declare alignment, and when you do not, you feel uneasy, as if you are missing something, falling behind, becoming irrelevant. This is not accidental. A person who hesitates is harder to model, harder to predict, harder to monetize. The system prefers clarity over complexity, reaction over reflection, and slowly, your inner life adapts to this preference. You begin to experience yourself as a set of responses rather than a source of inquiry. This is the second layer of the illusion. Not only that your choices are shaped, but that your sense of self is being stabilized into something easier to track, easier to engage, easier to keep inside the loop. And once identity becomes predictable, the final step is inevitable. Because a predictable self is not just easier to understand, it is easier to guide. Because once identity becomes predictable, influence no longer needs to be subtle. It becomes efficient. A predictable self does not need to be persuaded. It only needs to be nudged. Small adjustments, slight shifts in emphasis, a reordered feed, a different recommendation. And because these changes happen inside a space you already trust, they rarely feel intrusive. They feel natural, almost invisible. At this stage, the illusion of choice reaches its most refined form. You still feel autonomous. You still feel expressive. You still feel like an individual. But your decisions begin to cluster. Your curiosity narrows. Your worldview stabilizes into something rigid, repeatable, easy to anticipate. And the more stable it becomes, the more the system can work around it. Not against you, but through you. You start to notice that certain thoughts come to you faster than others. Certain reactions feel automatic. Certain conclusions feel obvious. And anything that does not fit into this internal structure feels exhausting to consider. Not wrong, just tiring. This is not because those ideas lack value, but because your mind has been trained to conserve energy by staying within familiar patterns. Reflection becomes inefficient. Reaction becomes default. Carl Jung warned that when the ego identifies too strongly with any image, belief, or role, it loses contact with the deeper self. In the digital environment, this identification happens constantly. You are invited to define yourself through preferences, affiliations, and opinions that are constantly reinforced. And because these identities are externally validated, they feel solid. But solidity is not depth, it is fixation. Over time, this fixation reduces inner movement. You stop exploring unfamiliar perspectives. You stop questioning assumptions that feel like you. You defend positions reflexively, not because you have examined them, but because they have become part of your psychological structure. And once something becomes part of your structure, challenging it feels like a personal attack. This is how control becomes self-maintaining. The system no longer needs to push you. You protect the boundaries yourself. You curate your exposure. You dismiss what feels uncomfortable. You avoid what disrupts your sense of coherence, and you call this discernment. But discernment requires effort. What you are practicing is filtering, and filtering always narrows. You may feel this narrowing as certainty, as confidence, as knowing where you stand. But certainty achieved without struggle is often borrowed. It rests on repetition, not understanding. And because it has not been earned through confrontation with doubt, it collapses easily when reality refuses to conform. This is where anxiety begins to grow. Not always consciously, but as a background hum, a sense that something is fragile, that your sense of self depends too much on external reinforcement, on likes, agreement, visibility. When these disappear, so does your grounding. Silence feels threatening. Disconnection feels like erasure. The final layer of the illusion is this. You begin to mistake constant engagement for existence. As long as you are reacting, responding, being seen, you feel real. When the feed goes quiet, when there is nothing to respond to, an unease emerges. Who are you when nothing is asking for you? When no algorithm is reflecting you back to yourself? This question is uncomfortable because it reveals what has been quietly outsourced. Not just memory, not just attention, but orientation. The ability to sit with yourself without immediate external input. The ability to think without being prompted. To desire without being suggested. To choose without being guided. Breaking this illusion does not require rejecting technology. It requires reclaiming inner space. Space where thought can develop slowly, where identity is not constantly reinforced but questioned. Where silence is not absence but depth. A space where you are not immediately known, even to yourself. This reclamation feels like loss at first. Loss of clarity, loss of certainty, loss of belonging. But what returns is something far more resilient, inner authority, the ability to hold ambiguity without panic, to resist immediate reaction, to notice when a thought is yours and when it has been placed in you. Algorithms can shape environments, they can influence patterns, but they cannot access what you refuse to externalize. They cannot predict what you do not immediately express. They cannot decide who you are if you stop letting your identity be stabilized by reaction alone. The illusion of choice only works when you never question the frame. Freedom begins the moment you do, because the final step of the illusion is not control, but dependency. Once the frame of your choices feels natural, once your identity feels settled inside patterns that are constantly reinforced, the system no longer needs to decide for you. It only needs you to remain inside it. And most people do, not because they are forced, but because leaving feels disorienting. You begin to notice how uncomfortable it is to exist without constant input, to think without prompts, to sit without reacting, to let a question remain unanswered. The moment there is no feed to scroll, no content to respond to, no signal telling you what matters right now, a subtle anxiety appears. not boredom, but a loss of orientation, as if your inner compass has been calibrated externally for so long that, without guidance, it no longer knows where to point. This is the deepest cost of algorithmic life. Not that it tells you what to choose, but that it weakens your capacity to choose at all. Choice requires inner friction, time, uncertainty, the willingness to stay with discomfort long enough for something original to emerge. But originality is inefficient. It cannot be predicted, optimized, or monetized easily. And so the system trains you away from it, gently, persistently, until reaction replaces reflection as your default mode of being. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires separation from collective influence, not in isolation, but in consciousness. You must be able to see the forces shaping you in order not to be ruled by them unconsciously. The danger is not influence itself. Influence is inevitable. The danger is invisibility. When you cannot tell where your thoughts end and the environment begins, you lose authorship over your own life. This is why reclaiming choice feels difficult at first. You are not simply choosing differently. You are rebuilding an inner structure that has been neglected. The ability to pause, to doubt, to resist immediate clarity, to hold conflicting ideas without needing to resolve them instantly. These capacities feel weak because they have not been exercised. But weakness is not absence, it is disuse. When you begin to slow down your reactions, something subtle but profound happens. The feed loses some of its urgency. Opinions lose some of their emotional charge. You start to notice when something is trying to provoke you rather than inform you, when it is trying to define you rather than expand you. And this noticing restores a sense of distance, a space between stimulus and response where choice can exist again. This space is uncomfortable. It removes the comfort of certainty. It takes away the reassurance of belonging to a clear narrative. You may feel less confident, less sure of where you stand. But this uncertainty is not weakness. It is the beginning of autonomy. A self that can tolerate not knowing is harder to capture, harder to categorize, harder to guide invisibly. You may also notice that when you stop reacting automatically, your inner life becomes richer. Thoughts take longer to form, but they carry more weight. Memories connect. Ideas evolve. You are no longer consuming yourself into existence. You are inhabiting it. And this habitation does not depend on visibility, validation, or constant engagement. The illusion of choice thrives on speed, on immediacy, on the feeling that everything must be decided now. Freedom, by contrast, moves slowly. It requires patience, silence, the courage to step outside the frame and endure the temporary loss of orientation that follows. But what returns is something no system can provide for you. A sense of inner direction that does not need to be constantly reinforced. Algorithms can suggest, they can predict, and they can nudge, but they cannot choose for someone who has learned to pause, to reflect, and to listen inwardly before acting. They cannot define a self that is willing to remain undefined long enough to discover what actually matters. The illusion of choice ends not when technology disappears, but when you stop confusing reaction with decision and familiarity with freedom. When you recognize that who you are is not something to be optimized, but something to be lived, slowly, consciously, and sometimes in resistance to what is easiest. Only then does choice become real again.